William Blackstone threw his whiskey glass into the fireplace the night his mother told him he was already promised. Not engaged, promised. Like a parcel of land. Like a debt settled between old men who never once thought to ask him. The glass shattered against the iron grate, and the fire hissed, and he stood there with his chest heaving and his hands balled into fists at his sides, staring into those flames like they owed him something. That was the night it all began, and by the time it ended, nothing in his world would ever be the same. If this story already has its hooks in you, go ahead and subscribe, and follow every single part through to the end. Drop your city down in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. The fire had burned down to embers by the time Lady Eleanor Blackstone finished speaking. She stood in the center of the sitting room of Blackstone Manor, straight-backed, chin lifted, hands folded at her waist, like a woman who had never in her life entertained the possibility of being told no. Her gray eyes moved across her son's face the way a man surveys land before purchase, measuring, calculating, unbothered by what the land itself might feel about the matter. "Her name is Rachel Whitmore," she said. "Her family holds the eastern parcel along the river. The merger of the two estates is not a matter of sentiment, William. It is a matter of survival." William said nothing. He stood with his back to her, one hand resting against the mantel, staring down at the broken glass and the amber stain spreading slow across the hearthstone. "You will call on the Whitmore family by the end of the week," Lady Eleanor continued. "You will conduct yourself with the dignity this family's name demands, and you will—" "Stop." His voice came out quieter than he intended. Quieter, and somehow worse for it. He turned around. "Mama, I am 30 years old." "I am aware of your age." "Then you ought to be aware," he said, "that I am not a parcel of land. I am not a debt to be settled, and I will not be handed off to a woman I have never met because her father and my grandfather shook hands over a bottle of bourbon 20 years ago." Lady Eleanor's expression did not change. That was the thing about his mother. She had learned, somewhere along the years, to make her face into a wall. Not cold exactly, just impenetrable. "The Whitmore girl is respectable," she said. "They say she's a fortune hunter. People say a great many things. They say she ran through 2 suitors in Baltimore, that she turned down a banker's son in Richmond because his estate wasn't large enough." William pushed off the mantel and walked toward the window, his boots hard against the floorboards. "They say she's been shopping for a title since she was 18 years old. And you believe everything society gossips over their tea?" "I believe where there is smoke," he said flatly, "there is generally something burning." Lady Eleanor was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Not gentle, exactly, but the careful softness of a woman choosing her words with precision. "Your father made a promise, William, to Henry Whitmore. A promise given to a dying man. Would you have me tell that family that the word of a Blackstone means nothing?" He didn't answer. That was the thing she knew would stop him. His father's name. His father's word. The old debt that sat on his chest like a stone he could never quite put down. "Ride out to the Whitmore estate," she said. "See her for yourself. If she is everything the gossips claim, then we will find another solution. But you will not dismiss this outright on the strength of parlor rumors. You are better than that." She left the room without waiting for his answer. She always did. Lady Eleanor Blackstone had never in her life needed the last word, because she had long since arranged matters so that her word was simply the only one that counted. William stood alone beside the dying fire. His jaw was tight. His chest was tighter. Samuel Bishop arrived the following morning without being sent for, the way he always did when William was in trouble. As though the man had some internal compass that swung toward disaster the way a needle swings toward north. He came in through the back of the house, helped himself to coffee from the kitchen, and found William in the study, surrounded by ledgers he wasn't reading. "Your housekeeper looks like she's been crying," Samuel said, dropping into the chair across the desk. "Which means you spent last night being disagreeable. Which means your mother's been here." He took a long sip of his coffee. "What's happened?" William told him. Samuel listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When William finished, Samuel set down his cup very carefully and looked at him across the desk. "Huh," he said. "That's all you've got?" "I'm thinking." "Think faster, Sam. I've been up since 4 in the morning, and I'm about half a step away from doing something that can't be undone." "Like what? Riding to Richmond and causing a scene?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Or something sensible." "I'm going out there." "To the Whitmore estate?" "To the Whitmore estate," William confirmed. "Not as myself." Samuel went very still. "I want to see her," William said. "Not from across a parlor, with everyone on their best behavior. Not at some arranged dinner where she's been told to smile and I've been told to be charming. I want to see who she actually is, how she treats the people around her, whether any of what they say about her is true." "And how exactly," Samuel said slowly, "do you plan to accomplish that?" "The Whitmores are short on hired help. I heard it from their neighbor's groom last month. The east pasture fence came down in the spring, and they haven't had the men to fix it." William leaned back in his chair. "I'm going to ride out there, tell them I'm a farmhand out of the hill country looking for work, and spend enough time on that property to know exactly what kind of woman Rachel Whitmore is." Samuel stared at him for a long moment. "That," he said finally, "is either the smartest thing you've ever said or the most catastrophic." "It's both," William said. "I know." "William," Samuel leaned forward, his voice dropping, "if she finds out, if anyone finds out, she won't. If she does, she won't, Sam." William met his old friend's eyes. "I need to know. Do you understand me? I need to know if my father's word is being honored on the strength of a woman worth honoring. I'm not walking into a marriage with my eyes closed and my hands tied. I won't do it." Samuel was quiet for a long time. Outside, a mockingbird called from somewhere near the stable, sharp and clear in the morning air. "You'll need different clothes," Samuel said finally. "Already thought of that. And a different name. Thomas Gray." Samuel rubbed his face with one hand and exhaled through his nose. "Lord have mercy," he muttered. All right. But William," he pointed one finger across the desk, "the moment it gets complicated, you ride home. You hear me? You don't let it get tangled. You go, you look, you come back, and we figure out what to do from there." "Agreed," William said. He was lying, and they both knew it. 3 days later, Thomas Gray rode up the long gravel drive of Whitmore Manor on a borrowed bay horse with worn tack and a week's worth of honest dust on his coat. He had scrubbed the softness out of his hands as best he could. Calluses didn't come overnight, but roughened skin and a laborer's grip could be approximated if a man was willing to spend 2 days working a splitting maul until his palms bled. He'd left his good boots at home and borrowed a pair from his head groom, scuffed and wide at the toe. He'd left his good razor at home too, which meant 3 days of stubble along his jaw that felt foreign and strangely freeing. He looked, he thought, reasonably convincing. Whether he could act convincingly was another matter entirely. The main door of the manor opened before he'd tied the horse to the post. A heavy-set woman in a plain apron looked him over with the frank, unhurried assessment of a woman who had been hiring and firing help for 30 years. "You the man Hendrik sent?" she asked. William, Thomas, hesitated for half a second. He hadn't known anyone was expected. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She looked at his hands. "You worked fence before?" "Yes, ma'am. Split rail, post and beam, whatever you need." She stepped back from the door and gestured with her head. "Come around the back. I'm Mrs. Hale. I run the household. You answer to me, and you answer to Mr. Pruitt down at the stable. You work hard, you stay out of trouble, you keep your eyes to yourself." She fixed him with a look that could have pinned a man to the wall. "We clear?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Good." She turned and walked back inside. "Wages are paid on Friday. You sleep in the bunkhouse with the other men. And don't go wandering into parts of this property you got no business being in." "Understood," he said. He followed her around to the back of the house, taking in what he could without appearing to look. The kitchen garden that needed weeding, the woodpile that needed stacking, the general quiet industry of a household that was managing on less than it had been built to need. The Whitmores had fallen on hard years, that much was plain. Not poverty, not yet, but the particular strain of a family holding itself together through sheer stubbornness while the edges quietly frayed. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected opulence maintained at all costs. The telltale desperation of a family living above its means, burning through what it had left to keep up appearances. He'd expected borrowed silver and rented finery. That was the portrait the gossips had painted. A mother and daughter who had overreached, who spent what they didn't have and schemed to make up the difference. This was not that. This was a household working, quietly, seriously, without performance. He filed that away and said nothing. He was shown the bunkhouse, given a cot and a peg for his coat, and by midday he was out at the east fence line with a post-hole digger and two other men who introduced themselves as Clem and Jasper and asked him exactly one question: where he was from, before deciding his answer was sufficient and going back to work. He liked them immediately. He did not let himself think about Rachel Whitmore for the rest of that afternoon. He saw her for the first time just before the supper bell. He was carrying a load of split rails toward the fence line when he heard her voice. Not her words, just the sound of it, low and clear, coming from the direction of the kitchen garden. He rounded the corner of the woodshed, arms full, and she was there. She was kneeling in the dirt, not sitting on a garden bench, not strolling along the path with a parasol and a pair of gloves. Kneeling, actually kneeling, in the dark earth between two rows of bean plants, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hands buried past the wrist in the soil. And she was talking. Not to him, not to anyone in particular. There was a small girl, maybe 7 years old, the kitchen maid's daughter by the look of it, crouched at her side, and Rachel was saying, patiently, "No, feel here, right here at the root. You feel that? That's where the water is sitting. If you don't give it somewhere to drain, the whole plant'll rot from the bottom up, and then you've got nothing." She guided the little girl's hand down into the soil. "There you go. You feel it?" "Yes'm," the little girl said. "Good girl. Now, what do we do about it?" "We dig it out some, so it can breathe?" "That's exactly right." Rachel smiled, and it was not the practiced smile of a woman performing for an audience. It was small and genuine, and entirely unself-conscious. "You're a quick learner, Bess. Don't let anyone tell you different." The little girl beamed. William stood very still with the rails in his arms and said nothing. Rachel looked up then, not startled, just alert. Her eyes found him with the calm, direct quality of a woman who had learned not to be unnerved by strangers on the property. She was perhaps 22, maybe younger. Dark hair pulled back simply, a smudge of dirt on her jaw, and eyes that were— he couldn't quite name the color in the fading afternoon light. Something between gray and green, the color of the river after rain. "You the new man?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Thomas Gray. Just started today." She nodded once, then looked back down at the garden. "The rails go to the east fence. Clem will show you where." "Yes, ma'am." He walked on. But something had shifted in his chest, quiet as a key turning in a lock, and he didn't know what to do with it. That night, lying on his cot in the bunkhouse, while Jasper snored and Clem muttered in his sleep, William Blackstone stared at the ceiling and tried to think clearly. The woman he had come here to expose was teaching a kitchen maid's daughter how to save a bean plant. The woman society had painted as a cold, calculating fortune hunter had dirt under her fingernails and hadn't so much as glanced at his hands to see whether they were gentleman's hands or working man's hands. He'd expected arrogance. He'd found something he couldn't quite categorize. She's performing, he told himself. She knows she's being watched by the household. She knows how it looks. That was the voice of reason, the one that had kept him safe and separate and armored for 30 years. This is what clever women do. They show you the version of themselves that disarms you. He turned onto his side. But that little girl had been real. The mud on Rachel Whitmore's hands had been real. The patience in her voice had been real. The kind of patience that couldn't be manufactured on short notice for the benefit of a new farmhand she'd dismissed in 15 seconds and hadn't looked at twice. He exhaled slowly. "Don't be a fool," he thought. "You've been here one day." He closed his eyes, but it was a long time before he slept. The next morning, he was at work before dawn. He told himself it was discipline. He told himself it was habit. He did not tell himself it'd have anything to do with wanting to be present when the household woke, wanting to watch the morning take shape around a woman who apparently knelt in the dirt without being asked and didn't find it beneath her. By the time the sun was fully up, he had replaced 3 posts and set the rails for 30 feet of fencing. Clem found him at the 7th post and looked at the work with raised eyebrows. "You always start this early?" Clem asked. "Habit," William said. Clem picked up the other end of the rail. "Miss Rachel'll like that. She's been trying to get this line fixed since March." "She checks the fencing herself?" "She checks everything herself." Clem said it without inflection, as simple fact. "The overseer they had before left in the fall. She's been managing the property work herself since. Her mother don't come out of the house much, so it falls to Miss Rachel." William set the rail and reached for the next one. "Seems like a lot." "It is a lot," Clem said, "but she doesn't complain about it, just works." He paused, considering. "Woman works harder than most men I know, truth be told, and she don't make a production of it." William said nothing. He picked up the next rail, and somewhere behind his ribs, in the place where his armor was thickest and had served him best, something very small and very quiet began to come apart. He lasted 4 days before he did something stupid. It wasn't intentional. That was the thing he would tell himself later, when he had time and distance enough to examine it honestly. He hadn't planned to intervene. He planned to watch, to observe, to gather his evidence the way a careful man gathers kindling, slowly, methodically, piece by piece. He had not planned to open his mouth. But then he heard her mother's voice through the parlor window, and his feet stopped moving of their own accord. "You are running out of time, Rachel." Mrs. Whitmore's voice had the brittle, carrying quality of a woman who had spent years making herself heard through closed doors. "The Blackstone heir will not wait forever. His mother has already written twice. Twice. And you have said nothing. You have done nothing." "I've been managing the east fence." Rachel's voice was quieter, steady, the voice of a woman who had been in this room, having this conversation, more times than she cared to count. "The posts were rotting through. If we lose the east pasture fence before the fall, we lose the cattle. And if we lose the cattle, I don't care about the fence." A silence. "Mama." Rachel's voice dropped further, gone almost soft. "I know you don't." "What I care about," Mrs. Whitmore said, "is that you are 22 years old, and we are running through your father's savings like water through a broken pail. And the one man in Virginia, with both the means and the obligation to marry you, is sitting at his estate, waiting for a sign that you are willing." "An obligation," Rachel said. "You just called me an obligation." "I called the arrangement an obligation. There is a difference." "Is there?" It wasn't a question. It was flat and dry and tired. "Rachel, he doesn't know me, Mama." Her voice cracked on the last word. Just once, just a fraction, before she pulled it back into steadiness. "He's never once ridden out here to call. He's never written. He sent his mother's secretary a letter of acknowledgement, and that is all. And you want me to go to him, hat in hand, and perform what? Eagerness? Gratitude?" A beat. "I won't do it." "Then what will you do? Tell me. What is your great alternative plan?" The silence this time was longer. "I'm working on it," Rachel said quietly. Mrs. Whitmore made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Working on it. Lord have mercy." A chair scraped back. Footsteps. "You have your father's stubbornness, you know. And look where it got him." The door opened, and William flattened himself against the wall of the house, and did not breathe until Mrs. Whitmore's footsteps faded toward the back staircase. He stood there in the afternoon heat for a long moment. "He has never once ridden out here to call." The words landed in his gut, like a stone dropping into still water, and the ripples spread slow and cold and damning. She wasn't wrong. He hadn't ridden out. He had listened to parlor gossip and decided before he'd seen so much as the woman's face that she was beneath his consideration. He had come here in disguise, not to know her, but to confirm what he'd already decided. To find the evidence that would let him walk away clean. He pushed off the wall and walked back toward the fence line. He did not allow himself to examine how he felt about that. On the 6th morning, Rachel Whitmore came to inspect the fence line herself. William was mid-swing on a post when he heard her boots on the dry ground, and he kept swinging. He had learned in those 6 days that the surest way to draw her attention was to stop working. She noticed idleness the way a hawk notices movement, instantly, without judgment, but unmissably. She walked the new line in silence, running one hand along the top rail, testing each post with a sharp shove. When she reached the section William had set the day before, she pushed hard. The post didn't move. "Good work," she said. "Thank you, ma'am." She moved to the next one, pushed, solid. "How much more do you figure?" "Another 2, maybe 3 days to finish the east run," he said, "if the ground stays dry." She looked up at the sky. "It won't." She said it with the certainty of a woman who had watched this sky long enough to read it. "We'll get rain by Thursday." "Then 2 days," he said. She nodded, still looking at the fence. There was a quality to her quiet that he'd noticed in the days before. Not the silence of a woman with nothing to say, but the silence of one who chose carefully when to spend words, as though she'd learned somewhere along the line that speech was a resource that could be wasted. "You've worked quickly," she said. I don't like leaving things half done. She glanced at him. Just a glance, brief and assessing. The kind she'd given him a dozen times in 6 days as he moved through the edges of her line of sight. "Where'd you work before this?" "Up near the Blue Ridge," he said, which was vague enough to be unverifiable. "Small spread. Owner sold out. Rest of us had to find work where we could." "Family?" she asked. He hesitated for a half-second. "No, ma'am." Something crossed her face. Not pity, exactly. Something quieter than pity. More careful. "I see," she said, and looked back at the fence, and the conversation was over as cleanly as a door being shut, but without unkindness, without the condescension of a woman talking down to hired help. She'd asked, he'd answered. She'd accepted the answer, and that was the end of it. He watched her walk back toward the house, and the thing in his chest that had been coming apart for 6 days came apart a little more. The trouble started on the 8th day. A man rode up the drive mid-morning, on a horse that cost more than the Whitmore family made in a month. And William watched from the fence line as the man dismounted at the front of the house and stood there, waiting to be noticed with the visible impatience of someone who considered waiting beneath him. Clem appeared at William's shoulder like smoke. "Harlon Croft," Clem said. "Who's that?" "Neighbor. Owns the land east of here, along the river. Been trying to buy this property for 3 years. Clem's voice was flat and uninflected, and somehow managed to communicate a very clear opinion anyway. "Miss Rachel keeps telling him no. He keeps coming back." William watched Croft. The man was perhaps 40, well-built, dressed in the kind of clothes that said money, the way a shout says, "Pay attention." He had the particular posture of a man who had never in his adult life been told no by anyone who mattered. "Does he?" William said. "About once a month." Clem picked up a rail. "Last time he came, he brought papers. Said her father had signed some kind of agreement before he died, giving Croft first right of purchase on the east parcel. Miss Rachel told him she'd never seen any such papers, and she'd thank him to take them off her property." William's eyes stayed on Croft. "What happened?" "He left." A pause. "But he smiled when he left, which was worse, if you ask me." Rachel appeared at the front door, unhurried, composed, wiping her hands on a cloth as though she'd been in the middle of something and hadn't seen any reason to rush on his account. William was too far to hear what was said, but he watched her body language the way a man reads a map. The slight squaring of her shoulders, the chin that lifted a fraction, the stillness that wasn't submission, but was something harder and colder than that. Croft reached into his coat and produced a folded document. Rachel looked at it without taking it. He said something. She shook her head once. He said something else. She held the door open and gestured for him to leave. Croft's posture changed then. A small shift. A tightening. The particular adjustment of a man who has been told no in front of nobody and hasn't figured out how to accept it gracefully. He stepped forward. Just one step, but one step too close, and William's hands went still on the fence rail. Rachel didn't step back. She held the door and looked at Croft with an expression William couldn't read from this distance, but he watched Croft read it, and Croft was the one who stepped back. He tucked the document back into his coat, tipped his hat. The gesture had the quality of a threat dressed up as a courtesy, and walked back to his horse. He mounted up, turned to look back at the house once, and then rode down the drive. Rachel stood in the doorway until he was gone. Then she went back inside. Clem exhaled slowly. "Every time," he said. "Every single time that man comes, I feel like something bad is being practiced." William picked up the rail. He didn't say anything, but he was thinking about that folded document, and about a smile on a man's face when he left, and about the particular meaning of a woman who never stepped back but was standing alone. The rain came Wednesday, not Thursday. Rachel had been off by a day, which William suspected happened to her exactly never on most subjects, and annoyed her considerably. He was stacking split rails under the barn overhang when the sky opened up, and he turned to find her standing 5 feet away under the same overhang, arms crossed, staring out at the sheeting rain with an expression of mild, personal affront. "You were right about the rain," he said. "Mostly." "I was off by a day," she said. "Still, a day is a day, Mr. Gray." But the edge of her mouth moved, just slightly, and for one moment she looked younger than 22 and more ordinary than she ever allowed herself to appear in the general course of things. "Don't try to make me feel better about being wrong. It doesn't suit you, and it won't work." He laughed before he could stop himself. It came out low and short and startled sounding, because it surprised him. The actual laugh. The real one. The kind he hadn't produced in so long, he'd half forgotten the mechanics of it. He pressed his lips together and looked away. She was looking at him. "What brought you to the hill country originally?" she asked. He turned back. Her eyes were steady and curious. Not suspicious, just genuinely interested in the way that some people were genuinely interested in other people, as a native habit, something she apparently couldn't switch off, regardless of whether the other person was a business acquaintance or a hired hand. "Family," he said. It was close enough to the truth. A sense of obligation I didn't ask for and couldn't talk myself out of. "I know something about that," she said, and the dryness of it landed exactly right. A wry acknowledgement between two people who had both been handed things they hadn't chosen and decided, separately, to carry them without making a scene about it. The rain hammered the roof. "That man who came yesterday," William said carefully. "Croft." Her expression didn't change, but something behind it did. The way a room changes when a door opens somewhere in the house. A shift in air pressure rather than a visible change. "What about him?" "He's been here before." "He has." "Is it going to be a problem?" She looked at him for a moment, measuring, deciding how much of the truth to give to a man she'd known for 8 days who had no business asking. "Mr. Croft believes he has a legal claim to the east parcel," she said finally. "He has produced documents to that effect. I believe the documents are false. I have not yet been able to prove it." The flatness with which she said it. No dramatics, no outrage, just the plain recitation of a problem being managed, caught him somewhere in the chest. "Do you have a lawyer?" he asked. "I have a lawyer in Richmond who is doing what he can." She paused. "What I have is time, Mr. Gray. I have time and stubbornness, and in my experience, those two things together can accomplish nearly as much as money." She looked back out at the rain. Nearly. He wanted to tell her, right then, in that moment, with the rain coming down and her standing 3 feet away being exactly who she was, without any artifice or performance. He wanted to tell her his real name, and what he had the means to do about a man like Harlon Croft and his fraudulent documents. He did not tell her. He told himself it was because it was too soon. He hadn't been here long enough. He didn't know enough. He needed to be certain. He told himself these things, and they were true as far as they went. And they didn't go nearly far enough. That night, he wrote a letter to Samuel Bishop. He wrote it by lamplight in the bunkhouse, after the others were asleep, crouched over the small board he used as a desk. And he wrote quickly and without stopping to think too hard about what he was writing, because thinking too hard would have made him stop. "Sam," he wrote, "I need you to look into a man named Harlon Croft, Eastern Virginia. claims to have a legal agreement with the late Henry Whitmore, giving him first right of purchase on the east parcel of the Whitmore estate. Rachel Whitmore believes the documents are fraudulent. I think she's right. Find out what you can and find out fast. He sealed the letter and addressed it, and would see it posted in the morning. Then he sat for a moment, staring at nothing. Rachel Whitmore believes the documents are fraudulent. He'd written her name without thinking. Her first name. He hadn't even noticed himself do it until the ink was dry. He blew out the lamp. He lay down on the cot, and somewhere in the dark, he admitted to himself the thing he'd been refusing to admit for 8 days. That he had come here to find evidence of a fortune hunter, and what he had found instead was a woman managing a crumbling estate alone, fighting a land dispute she hadn't started, raising a kitchen maid's daughter's confidence in a garden with dirty hands and patient words, refusing to step back when a man twice her size stepped forward, and looking at a hired hand she'd met a week ago with the same direct, careful attention she gave everyone around her, regardless of their usefulness to her. He had come here to find the worst of her. He had found something that made the worst of him feel very loud. That was the thought that kept him awake long after the rain stopped and the night went quiet. That was the thought he was still carrying the following morning when he went back to work. And Mrs. Hale stopped him in the kitchen yard with a look on her face that meant trouble before she'd opened her mouth. "You had a visitor this morning," she said, "while you were out at the fence. Man came looking for a Thomas Gray. Said he was an old friend." William went very still. "Didn't leave a name," Mrs. Hale continued, watching him with those sharp, unhurried eyes. "But he was dressed well. Very well. Too well for a man who'd have working friends." She paused. "Anything you want to tell me, Mr. Gray?" "No, ma'am," he said. Mrs. Hale looked at him for a long, careful moment. She said, and walked away, which was, in its own fashion, far worse than anything she could have said. He sent Samuel a second letter that same afternoon. This one was shorter. "Stay away from the property. You'll blow everything. I mean it, Sam." He didn't know whether Samuel had already been to the estate himself or sent someone. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Mrs. Hale had eyes like a courthouse judge and a memory that clearly retained details the way river clay retains footprints. And if a well-dressed stranger came asking for Thomas Gray a second time, the whole thing would unravel inside of an afternoon. He worked the fence line harder than he needed to that day, drove posts until his shoulders burned, let the physical work take the top off the anxiety before it could settle into something permanent. Clem watched him for a while without saying anything. Then, "You all right?" "Fine," William said. "You been swinging that maul like it owes you money since breakfast." "Just trying to finish before the ground softens again." Clem looked at the sky, looked at him. "Uh-huh," he said, and picked up his own maul and went back to work, and had the considerable grace not to push further. By evening, William had made his decision. He would stay 2 more weeks, no longer. He would gather what he needed to know. He would ride back to Blackstone Manor. He would tell his mother that he would honor his father's promise. And then he would find a lawyer in Richmond who could dismantle Harlon Croft's fraudulent claim before the man made another move on the Whitmore property. It was a clean plan, practical, manageable. He had it fully assembled in his head by the time he walked back to the bunkhouse that night. It lasted approximately 14 hours. He heard her crying before he saw her. He hadn't meant to be in the garden that late. He'd gone back for a tool he'd left near the woodshed, a draw knife he'd borrowed for the fence work, and had promised to return to the barn before dark. And he was already an hour past dark, and moving quiet to avoid waking the household when he heard it. Not loud crying, not the kind of grief that announces itself. The quiet kind, the contained, careful, exhausted kind that a person produces when they have been holding something back all day, and finally, when there is no one left to witness it, let a fraction of it go. He stopped. She was under the oak tree at the far edge of the kitchen garden, sitting on the low bench there with her arms wrapped around herself, her face turned down, and her shoulders moving with the slow, controlled effort of someone crying as silently as they could manage. He should have turned around. He knew that with complete clarity. He should have turned around, gone back the way he came, retrieved the draw knife in the morning, and said nothing about it ever. He should not have been there at all. He should have kept moving. He did not move. Because she was talking. Low, barely audible, the kind of talking a person does when they are alone and believe they are going to remain alone. Not talking to anyone exactly. Talking to the dark. Talking to the oak tree. Talking to a husband she hadn't chosen yet and might never choose willingly. "I don't want to be sold," she said. Quiet. Flat. Just a fact, stated aloud because there was no one to hear it. "I don't want to walk into that man's house and be looked at and measured and found acceptable or not acceptable, like I'm a piece of land being surveyed." A pause. A single, hard breath. "Papa, I don't know what you were thinking. I don't know what you were trying to do. But I am so tired." Her voice broke on the last word, just once, just a fracture. "I am so tired of holding this whole thing together. I am so tired of pretending it doesn't cost anything." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "I just want someone who looks at me and sees me," she said. "Not the land, not the debt, not the arrangement, just me. Is that—" She stopped, laughed at herself, a short, humorless sound. I know it's foolish. I know this is not how things work." She was quiet for a while after that. William stood in the shadow of the woodshed and did not breathe, and felt the full weight of every assumption he had brought to this property come down on him at once. Not gradually, all at once, like a timber giving way. She wasn't calculating. She wasn't performing. She wasn't executing some long-ranging scheme to secure herself a wealthy name. She was 22 years old, and she was exhausted, and she was frightened, and she was doing it all alone, in the dark, where no one could see. Because she had apparently decided somewhere along the way that the only person she could afford to fall apart in front of was the night air and a tree that couldn't report back to her mother. He took one step backward. His boot found a dry stick. The crack was small, catastrophic. Rachel's head came up. She was on her feet before he could move, her eyes cutting through the dark toward the woodshed with a directness that told him she was not a woman who startled into helplessness. "Who's there?" she said. He stepped out of the shadow because there was nothing else to do. The silence between them lasted 3 full seconds. He counted them. She looked at him. He watched her work through it. The calculating, the replaying, the arriving at the most likely conclusion, which was the correct one. "How long?" she said. "I just came for the draw knife," he said. "I heard you, and I should have turned around. I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore." "How long were you standing there?" He held her gaze. He had enough character left not to lie to her directly. "Long enough." The color came up in her face. Not embarrassment exactly, something harder. Something closer to the feeling of having been seen without permission. The particular violation of private grief exposed. "Get out," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Mr. Gray." Her voice stopped him, flat and controlled and furious. "If you repeat one word of what you heard to anyone on this property, you are finished here. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "And I won't. You have my word on it." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned back toward the house, and her back was straight, and her chin was up, and she walked with the full, constructed dignity of a woman who had decided that whatever had just happened, it had not happened to her. He stood in the dark for a long time after she was gone. "I just want someone who looks at me and sees me." He pressed the heel of his hand hard against his sternum, where something was pulling tight and slow and would not stop. She didn't speak to him the following day, or the day after. She moved through the property with her usual efficiency, checking the kitchen garden, consulting with Mrs. Hale, riding out to inspect the cattle pasture on her gray horse with the ease of a woman who'd been in the saddle since she could walk. And when her path brought her within distance of the fence line, she kept her eyes forward and her pace unchanged, and he could have been a fence post for all the acknowledgement she gave him. He let her have it. It was the least he could do. But on the third day, he was coming around the corner of the stable when he very nearly walked into her, and they both stopped hard, 2 feet apart. And for one unguarded moment, she looked at him with something raw and undefended in her face, before she had time to put her expression back in order. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Gray." Her voice was even. She made to step around him. "I meant what I said," he said quietly. "Not a word to anyone. Not ever." She stopped, kept her eyes forward for a moment, then, slowly, looked at him. "Why?" she asked. It came out genuinely curious, as though she had been turning the question over for 3 days and couldn't arrive at an answer that made sense to her. "Because it wasn't mine to hear," he said simply. "And some things a person says in the dark are between them and God and nobody else." She looked at him for a long time. The expression on her face was the most complicated thing he had ever been on the receiving end of. Wariness, and something that wasn't quite gratitude. Something older and more careful than gratitude. The look of a woman deciding whether to believe a thing that she wanted to believe, but had learned not to trust. "Thank you," she said finally, quiet and direct and without ornament. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She walked on, and something shifted between them after that. Not dramatically, not in any way that would have been visible to a third party, but the quality of her silence toward him changed, from the deliberate, constructed blankness of someone managing a problem, to the natural, easy silence of someone who had simply filed a person under "not a threat" and moved on. She didn't go out of her way to speak to him, but she didn't go out of her way to not speak to him either. And in the particular economy of Rachel Whitmore's attention, that was a significant distinction. The letter from Samuel arrived on a Thursday. William collected it from the post in town on his half-day, sat down on a bench outside the general store, and read it twice. "Will, Harlon Croft, I've been digging, and you are not going to like what I found. The document he's been presenting to the Whitmore girl is a forgery. The signature matches Henry Whitmore's on 2 genuine contracts I found in the county records, but the notary seal is from a man who died in 1814, 2 years before the date on the document. Croft apparently thinks no one will check. He may be right, because the lawyer the Whitmore family has in Richmond is a good man, but he's not looking in the right places. There's more. Croft has a connection to a county judge named Elias Pemberton. I don't know yet how deep it runs, but it is deep enough that if this goes to a local court, the Whitmores will lose. You need to come home, William. You need to come home and fix this properly. And you need to stop whatever else is happening out there before it gets worse." William read the last paragraph a third time. Stop whatever else is happening. He folded the letter, put it in his coat pocket, sat for a moment with his hands on his knees, looking at the street in front of him without seeing it. He needed to go home. Samuel was right. He had what he came for, more than what he came for. And the proper thing, the rational thing, the strategically sound thing, was to ride back to Blackstone Manor, present himself to his mother, and begin the process of handling this the way a Blackstone handled things. With resources, with legal counsel, with the particular leverage that came from being the kind of name that judges remembered when they were deciding how to rule. He stood up. He got back on his horse. He rode back to the Whitmore estate, unsaddled the horse, and put him in the stall. He told himself he'd leave in the morning. What stopped him was Harlon Croft. Not the man himself, not that day, but the consequence of him, which arrived in the form of Rachel's face at supper that evening. William ate with the other men in the bunkhouse kitchen, and the bunkhouse was close enough to the main house that sound carried when the windows were open. And the windows were open because it was warm. He heard Mrs. Whitmore's voice first, raised, unsteady, the voice of a woman who had been frightened into losing her composure. And then Rachel's voice, low and careful, and doing the work of keeping her mother from flying apart completely. He couldn't make out most of it. He caught fragments. Pemberton, the county seat, next month. He caught the word injunction and the phrase, "nothing we can do," in Mrs. Whitmore's voice. And he caught in Rachel's voice the very specific flatness of a woman who was saying, "It will be all right," while knowing that it might not be. Jasper looked up from his plate. "Croft again?" he said to no one in particular. "Has to be," Clem said. "Word came from town this afternoon. He's filed with the county court. Pemberton's court." "Lord," Jasper shook his head. Miss Rachel's lawyer wrote back saying there wasn't much he could do once it hit Pemberton's docket. Clem said it with the quiet, matter-of-fact anger of a man who had seen this particular kind of injustice before and recognized it and hated it, and knew how little his hatred counted for. County judge takes Croft's side. She loses the east parcel. Loses the parcel. She loses the cattle access to the river. Loses that. The whole operation starts to fail within the year. William set down his fork. "There's nobody who can challenge it?" he said. Clem looked at him. "You'd need a lawyer from outside the county, someone with enough standing that Pemberton couldn't just brush him aside, someone connected enough that ruling against him would cost Pemberton something." He paused. "You know anybody like that?" William held Clem's gaze. "No," he said. Clem nodded slowly. "No," he repeated. "Nobody does." He found her in the kitchen garden after dark, because that was apparently where she went when things became too large for the house to contain them. She was not crying this time. She was standing at the garden's edge, with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and the particular stillness of a person who has moved past distress into something colder and more purposeful. He stopped a few feet away. "I heard," he said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said. She said it without edge, without dismissal. Just the honest preference of a woman who found sympathy less useful than solutions. "It doesn't help anything." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you know what the worst part is?" She didn't wait for him to answer. "The worst part is that my father would have known exactly what to do. He always knew what to do. He had a way of looking at a problem and finding the angle no one else had thought of, and then just—" She stopped, exhaled. "I keep trying to think like him, and I keep coming up short." "You're not coming up short," William said. "I'm losing my land, Mr. Gray. You haven't lost it yet." She turned and looked at him with the full weight of her attention, the kind of look that made a man aware of how much he was and wasn't saying. "You're an unusual farmhand," she said. His pulse shifted. "How's that?" "You don't flinch," she said simply. "Most men, when something's difficult, they look away. They change the subject. they find somewhere else to be. She tilted her head slightly. You don't do that. No, he said carefully. I don't. Why? He held her gaze. He was standing at the edge of the thing, the full truth of it, and he could feel the weight of it pressing forward, wanting to be said. And he held it back with everything he had, because the timing was wrong and the ground wasn't prepared. And if he told her now, in the dark, with her land at risk and her guard worn thin, she would hear it wrong. She would hear it as manipulation, as another man with another angle she hadn't seen coming. Because walking away from hard things, he said slowly, is something I have done enough of. And I have decided I'm done with it. She looked at him for a long moment. That's a very honest answer, she said. I'm trying to be. Something in her expression shifted, small and careful, like the first movement of a door that has been shut a long time. Not open, not yet, but no longer entirely closed. Good night, Mr. Gray, she said. Good night, Miss Whitmore. She went inside. William stood in the dark and pressed his hand against his coat pocket, where Samuel's letter sat folded against his chest, and felt the full and complicated weight of being a man who had come here under false pretenses and somewhere along the way had stopped lying to himself about why he was still here. It was not about the arrangement anymore. It hadn't been about the arrangement for days. He needed to tell her. He knew that with the same bone-deep certainty he'd felt about very few things in his life, the kind of certainty that doesn't argue with itself. He needed to tell her who he was before someone else did, before Croft made another move, before the lie compounded itself into something she could never forgive. He turned toward the bunkhouse, and at the top of the drive, half hidden in the tree line, a horse stood motionless in the dark. And on the horse sat Harlon Croft, watching the house, watching the garden. William's blood went cold. Croft had not come to call. He had not come with papers or pretense or the performance of legitimate business. He had come in the dark, on a horse he hadn't stabled, and he was watching Rachel Whitmore's house the way a man watches something he has already decided belongs to him. William did not move. Croft held his position for 30 seconds more. Then he turned his horse and rode back into the tree line, slow and unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world. Which, William understood with sudden and absolute clarity, was exactly what Croft believed. He went to the bunkhouse. He did not sleep. By the time the first gray light began to build at the eastern edge of the sky, William Blackstone had made a decision that had nothing to do with arrangements or obligations or what his mother wanted. He was going to fix this, and then he was going to tell Rachel Whitmore the truth, and whatever came after that, he would face it standing up. He was gone before sunrise, not from the property, not yet. He rode hard into town in the gray pre-dawn quiet, found the post office still shuttered, and sat on his horse in the street until the postmaster came to unlock the door at 6:30, and looked at him with the mild alarm of a man unaccustomed to customers with that particular expression on their faces. I need to send an urgent letter to Richmond, William said. Today, not tomorrow, today. The postmaster looked him over. The worn coat, the stubble, the hands that had spent 2 weeks on a fence line. Express post costs double. I know what it costs, William said, and his voice came out with an edge that did not belong to Thomas Gray at all. And the postmaster blinked and stepped back slightly, and said nothing further about the price. William wrote the letter at the postmaster's counter, standing up, because he didn't have time to sit. Sam, Harlon Croft has filed with Pemberton's court. You were right about the connection. I need the best land lawyer in Richmond. Not a good one, the best one. retained and riding to the county seat before that case is called. I need the notary records checked on the Whitmore document, and I need the discrepancy formally documented and filed as evidence. Do not use my name. Use the estate's name. The Blackstone name will carry enough weight that Pemberton won't be able to ignore it without it costing him. Move fast, Sam. I mean fast. And get me a reply by Thursday, or I'm riding back myself. He sealed it, paid the express fee, watched the postmaster tuck it into the priority satchel. Then he rode back to the Whitmore estate, unsaddled his horse, and was back at the fence line with a post-hole digger before Clem had finished his breakfast. He did not tell Rachel what he'd done. He told himself it was because he needed confirmation from Samuel first, needed to know the lawyer was retained and moving before he said anything that might give her false hope. He told himself it was strategy. He told himself it was practical. He was lying to himself on both counts, and he knew it. And he kept moving anyway because movement was the only thing keeping the full weight of what he was doing from landing on him all at once. On Wednesday morning, Mrs. Hale stopped him in the kitchen yard again. This time she had a letter in her hand. Not from Samuel. This envelope was heavier, cream-colored, sealed with a wax stamp that even from 6 feet away, William could see was not the kind of stamp a working man's correspondence carried. "Came for you this morning," Mrs. Hale said. Her voice was careful. Her eyes were not. "Express delivery." She held it out. "Addressed to Thomas Gray." "But I've been running a household for 30 years, Mr. Gray, and that," she nodded at the envelope, "is not how people write to farmhands." He took the letter. "Mrs. Hale, I'm not asking you anything," she said. "I am telling you that whatever you are doing on this property, it had best not hurt that girl. You understand me?" Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I don't care who you are or what you came here for. Miss Rachel has had enough men walk through her life with their own interests ahead of hers. I won't stand by and watch another one." "I know," he said. "Do you?" "Yes, ma'am." He held her gaze. "I swear to you, on my father's name." Mrs. Hale looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Then she turned and went back into the house, and he exhaled slowly and opened the letter. It was from Samuel. It was 8 lines long, and the last line was underlined twice. "Lawyer is retained. Riding Thursday. Evidence documented and filed. Pemberton will have it on his desk by Monday. Croft is finished if we move fast enough. Come home, William. She will find out regardless. Come home and do it right." He found Clem at the water trough at midday and asked him, as casually as a man can ask a thing that matters enormously to him, what day the county court hearing was scheduled. "Week from Friday," Clem said. "Why?" "Just wondering how much time she has." Clem looked at him sideways. Had been looking at him sideways for 3 days, with the particular squint of a man who has decided something is not adding up, but hasn't yet landed on what. "You know," Clem said slowly, "I've been working hired land jobs since I was 16 years old. Worked properties from here to Tennessee. And I have never once, not one time, seen a farmhand send express letters." He paused. "Or get them." "Clem, I'm not saying nothing to nobody," Clem said, without heat, without drama. "I liked you from the first day, which doesn't happen to me often. And whatever you're doing, whatever it is," he looked William dead in the eye, "it looks to me like you're trying to help her. So I'm not going to ask, but I'm telling you, that woman has been fighting alone for a long time." He picked up his hat, settled it back on his head. "Don't let her down." William said nothing. Clem walked back toward the stable, and William stood beside the trough and felt the truth of his situation close around him, like a hand tightening around a fist. Thursday came. He was finishing the last section of the east fence, Truly, the last section. Posts solid, rails level, the whole long run complete. When he heard the horse on the drive and looked up and felt his stomach drop. It wasn't Samuel. It was Lady Eleanor Blackstone. She arrived in her black carriage with the Blackstone crest on the door, and her driver up front, and her personal secretary perched beside him. And she descended from that carriage with the composed, unhurried authority of a woman who had never in her life made an entrance she hadn't fully intended. She was looking at the house. She had not yet looked toward the fence line. William did not move, did not breathe. Did something complicated with his hat, pulling the brim lower, angling his body away from the drive. Jasper appeared at his shoulder. "That the Blackstone carriage?" he said. "Looks like," William said. "What in the world is Lady Blackstone doing riding out here unannounced?" Jasper craned his neck. "Lord, she's coming in." "Jasper," William said, his voice completely level, "go take a long lunch." Jasper looked at him. "A very long lunch," William said. Jasper looked at him a moment longer, then looked at the carriage, then back at him. Something moved across the old man's face. Something slow and enormous, like a realization arriving from a great distance. His mouth opened slightly. "Well, I'll be," he started. "Lunch," William said. Jasper shut his mouth, walked toward the bunkhouse, didn't look back. William pulled his hat down and turned back to the fence and drove a nail he didn't need to drive, and listened with every nerve he had. Rachel received Lady Eleanor in the parlor. He couldn't see it, but he heard it, or rather, he heard the aftermath of it, because 40 minutes after the carriage arrived, the front door opened, and Lady Eleanor's voice came out onto the porch with the carrying quality of a woman accustomed to being heard in large rooms. "I will be plain with you, Miss Whitmore. My son has been remiss in calling. That is a failure of his manners, and I take responsibility for not pressing him sooner. But the arrangement stands. The Blackstone name and the Whitmore land, this is not sentiment. This is two families honoring what was promised." A pause. Then Rachel's voice, composed and dry and unmistakably herself. "I appreciate your candor, Lady Blackstone. I would appreciate equal candor in return. Does your son know you're here?" A beat. "My son," Lady Eleanor said carefully, "is being managed." "Managed," Rachel repeated. "He has certain hesitations. They will be resolved." "Lady Blackstone." Rachel's voice had gone very still, the way deep water goes still just before it moves. "With respect, I am not interested in a husband who has been managed into marrying me. If William Blackstone has hesitations, I would suggest those hesitations are worth listening to, for both our sakes." The silence that followed was the longest William had ever lived through. "You are very direct," Lady Eleanor said at last. "I've found it saves time," Rachel said. Another pause, and then, unexpectedly, startlingly, something that might, in a certain light, have been a short, reluctant sound of appreciation from Lady Eleanor Blackstone. "I begin to see," she said, "why my son's lawyer has been making inquiries on your behalf." William closed his eyes. "I beg your pardon," Rachel said. "A lawyer from Richmond, retained apparently under the Blackstone name, looking into the Croft claim." Lady Eleanor's voice was measured, deliberate. "I assumed William had sent him. I assumed this meant he had been here, had met you, had decided—" She stopped. And there it was, under the composed surface of her voice, the very faint note of a woman who had just understood something she had not expected to understand. "He hasn't been here, has he? Not formally?" "No," Rachel said, "he has not." "Then who—" Lady Eleanor stopped. The silence stretched, and William, 50 yards away at a fence line with a nail he didn't need in his hand, felt the whole carefully constructed architecture of Thomas Gray beginning to come down. He had perhaps 3 hours. That was his estimate, driving it as fast and clean as he could through his head while he walked back to the bunkhouse and sat on his cot and stared at the wall. Lady Eleanor was not a stupid woman. She was the opposite of a stupid woman. She had heard that a Blackstone-funded lawyer was operating on behalf of the Whitmores without William's knowledge, and she had arrived to find no William, and she was currently sitting in Rachel Whitmore's parlor, working through the arithmetic of that. 3 hours, maybe less, before she arrived at the right answer. He had to tell Rachel himself. He had to tell her before Lady Eleanor did, or before she went looking for the hired man who had sent express letters and received them. The farmhand who had told her once that he was done walking away from hard things and put the pieces together on her own. She would put them together on her own. He knew that about her now, with the certainty of having watched her for 2 weeks. Rachel Whitmore was not a woman who let puzzles stay unsolved. He stood up. He walked out of the bunkhouse. He ran into Clem in the kitchen yard, and Clem took one look at his face and said, "Whatever you're about to do it right." "I intend to," William said. He found her coming out of the parlor. Lady Eleanor's carriage had gone. He'd heard it on the drive 10 minutes before. And she was moving quickly, the way she moved when her mind was already 3 steps ahead of her body. And she stopped when she saw him standing in the hallway, and something in her face went very careful. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I need to speak with you." "Mr. Gray." She looked at him with that direct, measuring gaze. "I was actually looking for you." Which meant she was already there, already arriving at the arithmetic. "I know," he said. "Lady Blackstone tells me a lawyer was retained under the Blackstone name to challenge the Croft claim." Her voice was level, precise, every word placed exactly where she intended it. She seemed to believe her son arranged it, but her son, she says, has not been to this property. She paused. "Has he, Mr. Gray?" The silence between them was the loudest thing William had ever heard. "Rachel," he started, and watched her face change. Not dramatically, not the theatrical collapse of someone betrayed in a story. Something quieter and more devastating. The particular stillness of a person whose intelligence has just completed a calculation they did not want to complete, and who is now sitting with the answer. "No," she said. The word came out low and stripped of everything but the bare fact of it. "I came here to—" "Don't." She took one step back. "Don't explain it yet. Just—" Her jaw tightened. "Tell me your name." He held her gaze. He owed her that much. "William Blackstone," he said. She looked at him for 3 seconds that lasted considerably longer than 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked away. He let her go. It was the hardest thing he had done in 2 weeks that had contained a significant number of hard things. But he let her go because she needed the space more than she needed the explanation right now. And because he knew, with the part of him that had been paying close attention to Rachel Whitmore for 14 days, that following her in that moment would be the single most effective way to make sure she never listened to him again. Mrs. Hale found him standing in the hallway. The look on her face told him she already knew. "You want to explain?" she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "She's going to need time first." "I know." Mrs. Hale crossed her arms and looked at him with the expression of a woman doing rapid and unflattering accounting. "You came here to judge her," she said. "You came here dressed up as a hired man to see if she was good enough for you." Her voice was flat. It didn't need to be angry. The facts were doing that work on their own. "And you sent a lawyer to fix her land problem without telling her," And now you want her to feel grateful." "No," William said. "No? I don't want her to feel grateful. I don't want anything from her that she doesn't choose to give willingly." He paused. "I came here to judge her, Mrs. Hale. You're right about that. And what I found was that the only person in this situation who deserved judging was me." He looked at the older woman steadily. "I'm not asking for absolution. I'm asking for a chance to tell her the truth, face to face, before someone else tells it for me." Mrs. Hale looked at him for a long time. "Give her an hour," she said finally. "Then go to the kitchen garden." She walked away. The hour was the longest of his life. He spent it in the bunkhouse because there was nowhere else to go that wasn't the property she managed, and he had no right to pace across her land while he waited for her to be ready to hear from him. He sat on the cot. He turned his hat in his hands. He did not construct speeches or rehearse lines because he had a strong instinct that Rachel Whitmore could detect a rehearsed line at 30 paces and would not tolerate one. He would tell her the truth, the full truth, beginning with the fire and the broken glass and his mother's voice and his father's promise. He would tell her what the gossips had said and what he had believed and what he had found instead. He would tell her about the letter to Samuel and the lawyer in Richmond and Harlon Croft watching her house from the tree line in the dark. He would tell her all of it, and he would not ask her for anything until she had heard every word. And if she sent him away, he would go, and the lawyer would still work the case, and the Croft claim would still be challenged, and she would keep her land, regardless of what she decided about him, because that was not a bargaining piece. That had never been a bargaining piece. He would make sure she understood that. He stood up when the hour was done. He walked to the kitchen garden. She was there, standing at the garden's edge, arms crossed, not looking at him as he approached. But she hadn't left. She had come, or she had stayed, or she had come back. He didn't know which. And she was there, and that was everything. He stopped 10 feet away, took off his hat. "I'll start at the beginning," he said, "and I'll tell you everything. And when I'm done, whatever you decide, I will honor it. You have my word." He paused. "For what that's worth, right now." She looked at him then. The expression on her face was the one he had no name for yet. The complicated one. The one with too many things in it to read all at once. "Start," she said. He started. He told her about the fire and the glass and his mother and his father's promise and the gossips and every assumption he had carried onto this property and the moment it began to come apart. He told her about the draw knife and the dark and what he had heard under the oak tree and why he hadn't turned around. He told her about Samuel's letter and the forged notary seal and the lawyer riding to the county seat and Harlon Croft on a horse in the tree line watching her house. He told her all of it. He did not rush it, and he did not ornament it. He stood in the kitchen garden with his hat in his hands and told the truth in plain language, the way a man tells it when he is done pretending he is something other than exactly what he is. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You came here to confirm I was a fortune hunter," she said. "Yes. And instead you found, what? A puzzle you couldn't solve?" "No." He held her gaze. "I found a woman I had no right to, and I know that. I'm not standing here asking for something I didn't earn. I'm standing here because you deserve the truth from me, and I owed it to you, directly, face to face, not through a letter or a lawyer or your mother's parlor." He paused. "That's all. That's the whole of it." She looked at him. "The lawyer," she said. "He's still working the case? Regardless of—" She gestured between them. "This?" "Yes, that has nothing to do with this. It never did." "You didn't use it as—" No. She nodded slowly. Processing. Filing. The notary seal, she said. You're certain it's documented? Samuel doesn't make mistakes with evidence. Another silence. She uncrossed her arms, looked out toward the far edge of the garden. I need time, she said. I know. I'm not... She stopped. Started again. I'm not saying never. I am saying I need time to decide what to do with everything you've just told me. His chest tightened. Take all the time you need. She turned and looked at him one more time, and the expression was still the complicated one. But there was something in it now that hadn't been there when he started. Something fragile and unwilling and very much alive. The look of a woman deciding whether to believe something she wants to believe and has been burned for before. William, she said. It was the first time she had used his name. He didn't move, didn't speak, let it sit. Don't disappear, she said quietly. He felt the breath leave him. I won't, he said. She went inside, and William Blackstone stood in the kitchen garden with his hat in his hands and his heart somewhere entirely outside his chest, and understood for the first time in 30 years what it felt like to want something more than he wanted to be safe. He stayed, not because she had asked him to, though she had, and those 2 words had done something to him he was still working through, but because leaving felt like exactly the kind of retreat he had promised himself he was done with. He moved out of the bunkhouse the following morning, because sleeping 10 feet from Clem and Jasper, while they silently recalibrated everything they thought they knew about him, was a particular kind of uncomfortable he couldn't justify inflicting on anyone. He took a room at the inn in town, rode out to the Whitmore property each morning, worked the fence line because the fence line still needed working, and because showing up was the only argument he had left that meant anything. Clem said nothing about it. He just handed William a post-hole digger on the first morning and went back to his own work, and that was that. Jasper, on the other hand, waited until the second morning and then said, with the deliberate casualness of a man who had been sitting on something for 48 hours, So you're the Blackstone heir? Yes, William said. Huh. Jasper was quiet for a moment. You're a better hand than I expected a rich man to be. Thank you, Jasper. Wasn't entirely a compliment, Jasper said, and walked away. Rachel did not come to the fence line those first 2 days. He didn't expect her to. He had handed her something enormous and complicated, and she was a woman who processed things fully before she acted on them. He knew that about her now, the way he knew the fence line and the east pasture and the particular sound of the property in the early morning. He had learned her in the doing of ordinary things, which was, he had come to understand, the only way worth learning a person. He waited. He worked. He did not manufacture reasons to cross her path. On the 3rd day, Samuel arrived. He rode up to the inn where William was staying, looking travel-worn and only slightly less anxious than William had expected, and sat down across from him at the small table by the window, and put both hands flat on the table, the way a man does when he wants to lead with facts before feelings. The lawyer filed Monday, Samuel said. Evidence is in front of Pemberton. The notary's seal discrepancy is documented, witnessed, and submitted in triplicate. Croft's solicitor has already started backing away from the original claim. Word came this morning. They know they can't defend it. William let out a breath he'd been holding for the better part of a week. The east parcel is safe? He said. The east parcel is safe. Samuel paused. Pemberton tried to delay the review. The lawyer sent a letter directly to the State Circuit Court, flagging the conflict of interest. Pemberton backed down within the day. He allowed himself a small, satisfied expression. The Blackstone name still moves things when applied correctly. Good, William said. Does Miss Whitmore know? Her Richmond lawyer was notified this morning. William nodded slowly, turned his cup in his hands. Sam, I know. She knows who I am. I know that too. Samuel looked at him steadily. How bad? She told me not to disappear. Samuel blinked. That's actually better than I thought. She also told me she needed time. Also reasonable. Samuel leaned back. William, what do you want? The question landed simply, the way Samuel always asked the questions that mattered, without ornamentation, without agenda. Just the plain shape of it, sitting there, waiting to be answered. I want her, William said, just as simply. Not the arrangement, not the land, not what my mother wants or what my father promised. Her, specifically. He looked up. Is that a completely unreasonable thing to have arrived at in 2 weeks? Samuel looked at him for a long moment. I've seen men arrive at it in less, he said, and I've seen men take 30 years and still get it wrong. He stood up, picked up his hat. Go talk to her. Stop sitting at this table. He rode to the property that afternoon. Mrs. Hale met him at the kitchen door with the expression of a woman who had been expecting him and had prepared accordingly. She looked at him for a moment, then stepped aside without a word, which he was choosing to interpret as progress. Rachel was in the parlor. She was at the writing desk, standing, not sitting, bent over a letter she was composing with the focused intensity she brought to everything. And she looked up when he came to the doorway, and there was something different in her face. Not resolved, not warm, not any of the things he'd been hoping for in his more optimistic moments. But the careful, defensive blankness she'd put up for 2 days after the revelation was gone. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the early days, direct and assessing and genuinely present, the way she looked at everything she was actually thinking about. Mr. Blackstone, she said. Miss Whitmore. He stopped in the doorway. I heard from Samuel this morning. The east parcel is secured. The claim is being withdrawn. Something moved across her face, relief enormous and briefly unguarded, before she pulled it back. I heard from my lawyer, she said. Yes. She paused. Thank you. You don't need to thank me. I'm going to thank you anyway. Her voice was steady. Whatever else is true, you protected my land when you didn't have to. When I didn't even know you were doing it. That... She stopped, chose the word carefully. That mattered. He said nothing. Let it stand. I've been thinking, she said. I know. Don't tell me you know. Let me say it. There was no sharpness in it, just the request of a woman who needed to speak her own mind, without being anticipated. He nodded. She turned to face him fully, away from the desk. You came here to test me, to verify whether I was worthy of an obligation your family had made. I understand why. I don't like it, but I understand the reasoning. She crossed her arms, not defensively, but the way she always did when she was thinking hard. What I can't quite get settled in my mind is whether what you felt, what you apparently decided to feel, over 2 weeks of shoveling fence posts, whether that is real or whether it is the result of watching someone when they don't know they're being watched. Whether you fell in love with me or whether you fell in love with a version of me that only existed because you were invisible. The silence after that was the most honest silence William had ever been inside. That's the right question, he said quietly. I know it is. And I don't have a clean answer to it. He took one step into the room, not toward her, just in, committed to the space of the conversation. What I can tell you is what I saw. You in the garden with Bess, teaching her about roots. You with your mother, when your mother was falling apart, holding the whole thing steady with your bare hands. You in the dark under that oak tree, saying the most honest thing I have ever heard a person say. because you thought there was no one there to hear it. You looking at Harlon Croft and not stepping back. He paused. I wasn't watching a performance, Rachel. There was no performance to watch. There was just you, doing the ordinary things, and I was standing there, becoming completely undone by them. She looked at him. He watched her jaw work, watched her decide something. You heard me cry, she said. Yes. You heard me talk to a dead man. Yes. And you didn't... She stopped. You didn't use it. You didn't come to me the next morning with sympathy and strategic kindness. You just... She shook her head slowly. You let me have it back, like it belonged to me. It did belong to you. She turned away, walked to the window, and stood with her back to him for a moment. And he let her have that too, let her have the window and the silence, and all the time she needed to arrive at wherever she was going. My mother wants me to accept the arrangement, she said. I know. She says it doesn't matter how it started. It matters where it ends up. For once, William said carefully, your mother and I are in agreement. Rachel's shoulders shifted, not quite a laugh, but something adjacent to it, something that loosened slightly the tense line of her back. She turned around. You understand, she said, that if we, it cannot be because of the arrangement. It cannot be because of the land or the debt or your father's promise. If I choose this, I choose it for myself, on my own terms, not as a transaction. That is the only way I want it, he said. Rachel, I swear to you, the arrangement dies here, today, regardless of what you decide. You keep your land. You keep every option you have. My mother can renegotiate her expectations. Whatever you choose, I am not using the arrangement as leverage. Not now, not ever. She looked at him. And if I need more time, she said. Then I'll be at the inn in town, he said, working the east fence in the mornings because it still needs work. And I'll wait. Something in her face finally, fully shifted. The last defensive calculation giving way to something more honest. The look of a woman who has finished examining a thing from every angle and arrived at a conclusion she trusts. You're an unusual man, William Blackstone, she said. So I've been told, he said. By you, actually, several times. And there it was, the real one. The smile she'd given the little girl in the garden, small and unguarded and entirely unself-conscious. It crossed her face like the first clear morning after a week of rain, and it was over in a second. But William felt the impact of it in every part of his chest. Come back tomorrow, she said. Yes, ma'am, he said. He came back the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. Not as Thomas Gray, not with a borrowed coat and roughened hands and a borrowed name. As himself, in his own clothes, on his own horse, calling properly at the front door, the way a man calls when he has decided that the woman inside deserves to be called on correctly. Mrs. Whitmore received him the first time with the barely concealed triumph of a woman who has been proven right about something she had been insisting on for months. He sat through it with what he hoped was appropriate humility. Rachel caught his eye across the parlor at one point, and the expression on her face told him she found the situation only slightly less excruciating than he did, which was its own particular comfort. They talked, properly, directly, without the convenient buffer of the employer-farmhand distance between them. He asked her things he'd been wondering about for 2 weeks. About her father, about the East Pasture operation, about how she'd learned to read the weather the way she did. She asked him things that told him she'd been wondering too, in her own careful way. About Samuel, about his mother, about the night he'd stood in the rain at the fire with a broken whiskey glass and felt the walls of his life closing in. Were you angry, she asked, about the arrangement? Furious, he said. And now? He considered that honestly. Grateful, he said, which is a complicated thing to admit. Why complicated? Because I came here to be angry, and I can't hold on to it anymore. And that requires revising a significant number of things I thought I knew about myself. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I know something about that. I know you do, he said. The thing that broke it open entirely happened on a Thursday, 11 days after he'd told her the truth in the kitchen garden. Lady Eleanor arrived again, properly this time, with notice and a calling card, and the full regalia of a social call, conducted according to every convention. She sat in the Whitmore parlor. She accepted Mrs. Whitmore's best tea, and she looked at Rachel Whitmore across the low table with the expression of a woman doing a final accounting. "I will be honest," Lady Eleanor said. "I came here the first time to manage a transaction. What I found instead was a woman who told me my own son's hesitations were worth listening to." She paused. "I have been told that all my life, by people I disregarded. I find it remarkably more convincing coming from someone who had every reason to say the opposite." Rachel regarded her steadily. "I meant it." "I know you did." Lady Eleanor set down her cup. "That is precisely why I'm here." She looked between Rachel and William. "I am withdrawing the formal arrangement. Whatever happens between you two happens on its own terms, freely, without the weight of my husband's promise pressing down on it." Her voice was careful. "Henry Whitmore was owed a debt. I have discharged that debt through the lawyer and the land protection. The human part," she looked at her son, "the human part was never mine to arrange." The silence in the room was full and clean. William looked at his mother with more complicated feeling than he had words for. She did not look away from it. That was the thing about Lady Eleanor. She never looked away from the things she had done or the costs they'd carried, even when looking was painful. It was, he realized, something they shared. "Thank you, Mama," he said. She nodded, once, sharp, and reached for her tea. It was 2 days later when Croft made his final mistake. He arrived at the Whitmore property without warning. Not at the front door, not with papers, not with any pretense of formality. He came to the stable yard while Rachel was with the horses, alone. And he came with 2 men William didn't recognize. And the way those men positioned themselves when Croft started talking was not the posture of people engaged in legal conversation. William was at the fence line. He heard her voice first, controlled, refusing to show fear. And then Croft's voice, lower, with the particular intimate menace of a man who has decided that the legal avenue is closed and is exploring what remains. "The lawyer stunt was clever," Croft said. "Your new friend has resources. I'll give him that. But resources have limits, Miss Whitmore, and what I have is patience. I have been patient with this property for 3 years. I intend to be patient for 3 more, if that's what it takes. And in the meantime," he took one step forward, "your new protector will go home to his estate and his mother and his very comfortable life. And you will still be here, alone, and I will still be next door. And eventually—" "That is enough." William's voice came out flat and absolute and completely without temperature, which was somehow colder than anger would have been. He was across the yard before Croft finished turning, and he stopped 6 feet away. And he did not raise his voice because he did not need to. "Get off this property," William said. Croft looked at him with the assessment of a man measuring whether the threat was real. Whatever he found in William's face apparently settled the question, because the 2 men behind him shifted slightly. "Blackstone," Croft said. He put a smile on it, The smile had no warmth in it anywhere. "I heard you'd been playing servant on the Whitmore land. Interesting way to court a woman." "I'm going to say this once more," William said. "Get off this property. You are trespassing. The claim is dead, the evidence of forgery is on file with the state circuit court, and if you, or either of the men with you, come within sight of this house again, I will personally ensure that Judge Elias Pemberton's history of ruling in your favor receives the full attention of the Richmond papers." He paused. "I have the documentation. I have the dates. I have the money to make certain that documentation is read by every person in Virginia who matters." Another pause. "Do you understand me?" The smile left Croft's face. It left completely, and what was underneath it was smaller and uglier, and for the first time since William had watched him ride up that drive 3 weeks ago, afraid. He looked at William for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the yard. His men followed. The sound of hoofbeats faded down the drive. Rachel let out a slow, controlled breath beside him. "The documentation," she said, carefully. "Do you actually have it?" "Samuel does," William said. "Every piece of it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, "He's not coming back, is he?" "No," William said. "He's not." She turned and looked at him, fully, directly, without any of the careful measurement she'd been doing for weeks. Just looking, the way a person looks when they have finished deciding, and are done with the deciding, and are simply present. "William," she said. "Yes?" "I'm done needing time." His heart did something sharp and immediate behind his ribs. "Rachel, I know who you are," she said. "Not Thomas Gray, not the Blackstone heir, and not the arrangement, and not the man my mother needs me to marry. I know who you are because I watched you work a fence line for 2 weeks and tell me the truth when you didn't have to, and walk out of a woodshed and let me keep my own grief." Her voice was steady and low and absolutely certain. "I know you because you came here to judge me and then stayed to do something better. And I know you because when Harlon Croft stepped toward me just now, you didn't ask me if I needed help. You just came." She held his gaze. "That's who you are. And that's the man I'm choosing. Not the other version. This one." The breath left him completely. He took one step toward her, and she didn't step back. And he said her name, once, just the 2 syllables of it. And it held everything he had been carrying for 3 weeks, and couldn't find words adequate to. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. Just her hand, just the warmth of it, simple and direct and entirely like her, and looked at him with those gray-green eyes and said, "I looked up one day and found a man on my fence line who didn't flinch from hard things. Turns out, I didn't want to let him go." They announced the engagement the following month at a gathering of the Virginia gentry that Lady Eleanor organized with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had been waiting to arrange something for a very long time. The parlors were full. The society was present. And there were whispers, because there are always whispers, about Rachel Whitmore's family and her land troubles, and the peculiar story circulating about the Blackstone heir working a fence line in disguise. Rachel stood at the top of the stairs and heard the whispers, and did not adjust her expression by a single degree. William offered her his arm. "They're talking," she said. "They always are," he said. "Does it bother you?" He looked at her, at the woman who had taught a little girl about roots, who had refused to step back when a man twice her size stepped forward, who had cried in the dark for a dead father and a future she hadn't chosen, and a version of love she'd been afraid to ask for out loud. "Not even slightly," he said. She took his arm. They walked into the room together, and the whispers receded, and the music started, and Virginia's finest society witnessed what happened when a man stopped running from hard things, and a woman stopped waiting to be seen, and found each other, honestly, in the ordinary dirt of a life lived without performance. William Blackstone had ridden to Whitmore Manor to find a fortune hunter, and what he had found instead had dismantled every wall he'd built and remade him entirely. And he had not one single regret about any of it. Some debts, it turned out, were not burdens at all. Some debts were the best thing that ever happened to a man who was too armored to have found his way there on his own.